Alrighty, good evening, everyone. Before I turn the floor over to Rabbi Yoni Rabinovich, I just wanted to take this opportunity to actually introduce Rabbi Yoni Rabinovich to all of you here this evening. For those of you who are in the Daf Yomi, you've had the opportunity to learn with him for well over a month at this point. But for those of you who are not in the Daf, I just wanted to tell you briefly who Rabbi Rabinovich is. He's going to be our William Fishman rabbinic intern for this upcoming year. Rabbi Rabinovich was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. He spent 2 years studying in Israel. He spent 1 year at Yeshivat HaKotel and the other at Yeshivat Keren B'Yavne, and has received his bachelor's in biology at Yeshiva University. And he's currently pursuing smicha, rabbinic ordination, as a fellow of the Wexner Smicha Honors Program at Yeshiva University at REITs, as well as a master's from the Wurzweiler School of Social Work. Yoni currently resides in Washington Heights with his wife Nechama, who is studying to be a dentist at the Columbia University College of Dental Medicine. We obviously look forward to learning with you tonight. We hope in the near future we'll be able to learn with you and daven with you in person, God willing, in the near future. But I now take the opportunity to turn it over to Rabbi Rabinovich. Be easy on him, but not too easy.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Bugler, for the warm introduction. I'm so excited, as is my wife, who will hopefully, everyone get to meet soon. But we're so excited to be part of the Jewish Center, to be the intern this year. We're hoping, it's not the same over Zoom as it is in person, so we're very excited to hopefully maybe after the Chagim to come in person and see everyone at davening and other events. But I'm just very excited. So with that, I'm gonna, get started. Everyone here is here to learn at the beginning of Melachim, so I'm excited to share for the first time as part of the Jewish Center. So the topic of this share, I think we titled "The Vision in the Kingdom: Adoniah's Deceit and Solomon's or Shlomo's Celebrated Ruling." So we're going to be talking about two different topics. The first is Adoniah and Avishag. What exactly is going on when Adoniah seemingly revolts or kind of tries to take the throne, and what Avishag's role is in all that. We'll look through that. The second thing we're going to look at is Shlomo's famous ruling where he says, cut the baby, probably the most famous court ruling in all of Tanakh, maybe all of history. And we're going to look through the psukim, we're going to go ask some questions, and hopefully over time we'll come up with some answers which will shed some light on exactly what's going on. So I'm going to share my screen. I think that the source sheet was sent out. Perfect. So let's start off. So again, we're going to just read the psukim, ask a couple questions, we'll go through it, and then hopefully we'll be able to put everything together and get a better idea of what's going on. So the very beginning of Melachim, we're introduced to David HaMelech, David the king. The HaMelech David Zakein, Ba Bayamim, Vaychasu Babgadim V'lo Yicham Lo. So David the king, he's very old, he's advanced in his years, and though they covered him, he's covered in clothes, but he can't get warmed. So he's got this problem, how do I stay warm? So so his slaves say, his servants say to him, the highlights we'll get back to later, but his servants tell him, Yivakshu laduni hamelech na'ara v'tzula, v'tzula v'amda lifnei hamelech utihilo sochenet v'shachva v'chekecha. So his servants say to him, my master, the king, you should go and find a young virgin. Now why that's important is unclear. Hopefully we'll get back to that. And she should stand in front of the king, and she will be a sochenet, a warmer. So her body heat is going to, she's going to lie in your bosom and she's going to heat you up. And you'll warm up that way. So they go and they look for the most beautiful girl, the whole Yisrael, the entire boundaries of Israel. So they find Avishag the Shunamit. She's the special woman set aside to warm up David. Again, why we need a beautiful woman to warm up David is not entirely clear. And the psukim tell us this woman was exceedingly beautiful. And she warmed up David, and she served him, she waited upon him. And our last introduction to her is that the king, David, was not intimate with her. So in just 4 psukim, we've got a host of questions. I think we raised some of them as we were speaking. And if you have questions, we'll stop at the end of the part 1 for sure, at the end of Adoniah and Avishag. But if there's anything, if I'm not being clear, please feel free to interrupt. And time allowing, if time allows it. So we'll try and answer everything. But some of the questions I just put at the bottom, some of the very, very outstanding questions, although there's others, is first of all, is this really the only way to attend to David's health needs? David HaMelech, the king, needs to be heated up. There's something which we all know and love called fire, but apparently that was not what the servants thought was a great idea. They decided to go for human body heat. So where did they get that idea, and why is that what they chose? Second question, that the Psukim tell us specifically that she's a virgin. So why do we need a virgin? It's very strange. Chazal say that maybe virgins are more warm than non-virgins. It seems like a little bit of a stretch. There's a good rule that whenever Chazal tell you an interpretation, it seems like a little bit of a stretch. So they're clearly picking up on something which is difficult in the text. So the obvious question here is that why is it important that she's a virgin? And then the other questions are very similar. Why do the details of her great beauty need to be emphasized? Why do we care if she's beautiful or not beautiful? All we need is to warm up David. And similarly, at the end, why do you need to tell me that she and David were not intimate with each other? What does anything have anything to do with one thing have anything to do with the other? We're just trying to keep the king warm. There's all these details which seem like they're trying to tell us something, but it's entirely unclear what that is. So that's our introduction to Melachim, the first 4 psukim. A lot of confusion, I'd say. Fine. Then we transfer into the next story. The next story is Adoniah. So Adoniah is one of David's children, and David, we know, is very old, and Adoniah tries to go and take the throne. So let's go through it. So now starting pasuk Hey, the next pasuk, Adoniah ben Chagit mitnaseh lemor ani amloch. So Adoniah, the son of Chagit, comes about. He's David's child, and he says, "I'm going to be the king." Vayas lo rechev ufarashim v'chamishim ish ratzim lefanav. And so he makes for himself chariots and horses, and he has 50 men running in front of him. He's making a whole procession. And then the psukim tell us a very interesting detail. Lo atzavo aviv mi'amav. His father, i.e. David, never made him sad or never scolded him. Lemor madua kacha asita. David never told him, why did you do this? Meaning he never reprimanded him. V'gam hu tov toar me'od. And by the way, side point, Adoniah was a very good-looking person. He was very fine-looking. Ve'oto yalda acharei Avshalom. And he is the next child after Avshalom. So in that pasuk already, there's a whole bunch of things which make you wonder, like, why are we talking about this? Okay, we're trying to say that Adoniah was the next king. So was the next in line. But what are all these details? His father never scolded him. So Chazal say a very interesting idea that one who doesn't rebuke their child will end up causing their child's own downfall. I mean, the reason why we're emphasizing that David never scolded him is to tell you that what ends up happening with Adoniah, if you continue to read the next upcoming chapters, is that Adoniah is going to end up being killed because he does something which we'll get back to, which seems like insurrection against Shlomo. So because David never scolded him, that's what led to his downfall. But on a more simple level, what we're saying in this pasuk is that Adoniah is a very logical next choice for the king. Adoniah probably didn't even know that he was doing anything wrong. His father never scolded him in his entire lifetime. I mean, he thought he was one of David's favorites. David never said that he did anything wrong. He thought he was the next in line for kingship. One of the things that we care about in the king is that he looks very good. So he was very good looking. Just saying in the translation, they put very handsome at the end. And he was very handsome, like Avshalom. We know that Shaul, there are many kings. One of the things for being a king is you're supposed to look good. And he was the one who was born after Avshalom. So why is that important? So if you look in source 3, actually, we're told all of the children of David. So in Shmuel Bet, in the second book of Samuel, so the sons of David were, his firstborn was Amnon, and then going to the next pasuk, his second child was Kilav, and his third was Absalom, son of Maacah, and the fourth was Adoniah. So just to review, since everyone here learned Shmuel Bet, I was not privileged to be part of all of Shmuel Bet, but I heard that everyone here learned Shmuel Bet all the way from Yoshua. It's incredible. Amnon and Avshalom have both been killed, and Kilav is the only one we haven't heard anything about. In fact, for the rest of Tanakh, we don't hear anything about him. So Chazal tell us that he was one of the 6 people who never sinned. Chazal say, rabbis say that maybe he was one of the people who never sinned in his whole lifetime. Right now, he's just learning Torah. Maybe he doesn't want the kingship. The Radak and the Metzudat Zion say maybe he just died. We don't know what happened to him, but for some reason, he's out of the picture. meaning the first three children of David, are out of the picture for some reason, and Adoniah is the next logical choice. He's number 4. So going back to the Psukim, we can just read in English over here. So he discussed his intentions with Joab, with Yoav, son of Tzuriah, and with the priest Eviatar, and they supported Adoniah. So Yoav, who's actually one of David's, or generally seems to be on David's side. Yoav is definitely a complicated character, but Yoav is generally on David's side. He supports Adoniah, as does Eviatar, who was the Kohen Gadol. But the priest Zadok is going to end up becoming the next Kohen Gadol, Benayahu, son of Yehoiada, the prophet Natan, Shimi, and Rei, and David's own fighting men did not side with Adoniah. So it's a split in the kingdom whether to follow Adoniah or not. He makes a feast in the 9th pasuk, but then let's skip to the bold for a second. A very important line. He invited all his brother princes and all the king's servants of the tribe of Judah. Or in Hebrew, Vayikrat Kol Achav, he called all of his brothers, Bnei HaMelech, U'lechol Anshe Yehuda, Avdei HaMelech. So he invites all of his brothers, meaning the other brothers, who are the people who might become the next king after David. David's very old. So the people who are going to take the throne are his brothers, obviously, meaning one of the brothers. So he's comfortable inviting them all to his own feast, meaning he doesn't think that they're in any way, his competition. So he's very comfortable. He thinks that he's doing the right thing, or he thinks at least he'll have support. The king's own servants he invites, and they end up coming. So who does he not invite? There's very few people he doesn't invite to this procession. That Natan Hanavi Benayahu ve'et Giborim, Natan the prophet, Benayahu, and the fighting men aren't invited. And most importantly, that Shlomo Achiv lo kara. So the only brother which he doesn't invite is Shlomo, his brother. Meaning, what does that mean? That means that he doesn't think that his other brothers are going to cause a problem, that they're any competition, but he knows that it's a possibility that Shlomo might become the next king, and that's why he doesn't invite him. He knows that Shlomo would not approve what's going on. Now you wonder, how is this possible? Like, how come no one knows who exactly the next king is going to be? What's going on over here? So someone pointed out that apparently, and I don't know if this is true, but the current Queen of England has not made clear who the next heir to the throne is either. So if you think about it, it's very logical that you're not going to share who the next king is, because it can cause all sorts of fighting and assassinations and whatnot. So David has not made clear who the next king is, it seems. And Adoniah honestly believes he's got a good shot. He's the next in line. So he starts his own procession claiming himself as king. And he knows that Shlomo might be the next in line. He doesn't know, but he doesn't call to him because he knows that that's not going to work out. Or he knows that there's going to be some opposition. Okay, so what happens next? So we're going to skip a few psukim. What happens next is that Natan, the Navi, convinces Bathsheba that she should approach David, that she should publicly declare that David should publicly declare David should publicly declare that Shlomo is the king, and then the insurrection, so to speak, will be ended, and Shlomo will become king. Now, why is it that Natan's behind Shlomo? Because he's going to say in the psukim, and we'll see in a moment, that Natan has actually, first of all, in Divrei Hayam, it's clear that Natan told David that Shlomo is going to be the next king. So David knows this, and Natan knows this, even though the rest of the nation does not know this necessarily. And second of all, David actually made a promise to Bathsheba that Shlomo would be the king. So all that's going to come together. We're skipping a little bit. Natan's already told Bathsheba that this is going to occur, that this is what should happen. And so now Bathsheba is approaching the king. So if you look in Pasuk Tedvav, we'll just read the first Pasuk inside over here. Vatavov Bathsheba el HaMelech. So Bathsheba comes to the king, HaChadra, to the room, HaMelech Zakein Ma'od. And the king is very old. Okay? Abishaga Shunamit Misharas Es HaMelech. So very strange Pasuk over here. That Bathsheba comes in. Right now we've got a moment of contention. Who's going to be the next king? Everyone's worried. Adoniah, he's making this whole procession. He's going to take over the kingship. Oh, and by the way, the king was very old, and Abishag the Shunamite was serving the king. And then the psukim don't come back to Abishag, as we'll continue to read. It's not clear why Abishag is so important. Hopefully we'll get back to that. But for some reason, the Navi wants us to know that Abishag's around. Okay, we'll get back to that. So now let's just read in English. So Bathsheba bowed low in homage to the king, and the king asked, "What troubles you, Bathsheba?" So she answered him, "My lord, the king, you yourself swore to your maidservant by Hashem's name."
English, we could read it ourselves.
Say again. So So she answered him that you swore that Shlomo would be the next king and he shall be on the throne. So, and then she tells him, but by the way, David's not aware of the fact Adoniah has become king and you, my lord the king, know nothing about it. He has prepared a sacrificial feast of a great many oxen, fatlings. He created the whole thing, etc., etc. And so in Pasuk 20, the eyes of all of Israel are upon you, O Lord the king, to tell them who shall succeed on the throne. Otherwise, when my lord the king lies down with his father, now this part's important to read in Hebrew because translation has to take a side. Often that's the case. So I'm going to read in Hebrew. Behold, when the Lord the king, meaning when David, when you one day die, when you die, that I, says Bathsheba, and my son Shlomo will be chataim. So chataim is a funny word. Chataim means will be sinners, literally. That's what it means almost everywhere in Tanakh. Exactly what Bathsheba and Shlomo have done wrong that they would be chataim is very strange. So it's not entirely clear from over here. So we'll just start the questions over here. What you see from this area over here is actually maybe before we get to the questions, let's just summarize what happens afterwards. So David ends up listening to his wife, to Bathsheba. He declares publicly that Shlomo is the king. Shlomo then allows Adoniah to survive, meaning the question is, should we kill Adoniah for his insurrection? And so clearly Adoniah didn't really think that he was doing anything wrong. Otherwise, Shlomo would have obviously killed him. Adoniah thought he really might be the next heir to the throne. And so Shlomo allows him to live on condition that he remains loyal. And then that's basically what ends for this parak. So the questions with these psukim which we just read are, again, we mentioned this, why mention Abishag as serving David just as Bathsheba enters? Why is that important at all? And then second, what's this phrase at the end that Bathsheba and Shlomo will be sinners, they'll be chataim if Shlomo isn't throned. So it's actually interesting, Rashi and Unplus say chataim doesn't mean that they'll be sinners. Chataim maybe means that they'll just won't have the throne. Chataim sometimes can mean to miss. So we will have missed the opportunity for the throne. But again, whenever you have a explanation, which seems like a little bit of a stretch, so it's a good proof that there's something maybe more going on over here. There's something to look into. Okay, so the answer to all these questions can probably be answered by something in the very next parak. The Abishag, the character, only comes up 3 times in all of Tanakh. These times right over here, and then which is 2 times meaning once at the beginning of this parak, once over here where we're just told, by the way, she's hanging out just as Bathsheba enters. And then finally is this next parak, and after that we don't hear about her.
Isn't there some sarcasm in the Navi? So chataim is on some level of sarcasm, and then later on, doesn't Bathsheba suggest that why don't you marry Abishag to Adoniah? If I'm remembering that right, which is clearly a sarcastic impulse to David. So I think there's an undercurrent of beneath the text by the Navi.
That's a great point. It definitely could be. We'll see an explanation that it's actually very literal, but it could be that this is some form of sarcasm as well. We'll see in the next source actually what ends up happening with Abishag and Adoniah. So great point, Bernie, though. So the only other time where Abishag comes up is in the next parak, which is exactly what Bernie was just mentioning. Adoniah promised to be loyal to Shlomo. That's what happened. And then we're told in source 5 over here that Shlomo his rule is firmly established, and all of a sudden Adoniah makes an interesting request of Bathsheba, of David's mother, that she says to him, looking in 13, she said, do you come with friendly intent? She wants to know, Adoniah, what are you doing coming to me? You know, she's clearly a little suspicious. He says, don't worry, I'm being friendly. And then 14, he continues, he says, I would like to tell you. She says, speak up. And then he goes and tells her, after a little bit of praising Bathsheba, he says in Pasuk 17 over here, he replied, please ask King Shlomo, meaning please ask the king, for he won't refuse you. You are his mother, to give me Abishag the Shunamite as a wife. Meaning he asks that David's warmer should be his wife. So she says, okay, I'll go and do it. I'll speak to the king. And so she goes to Shlomo to speak with him about Adoniyahu. And then she said to him, please let Abishag be wife for Adoniah. She doesn't even mention that Adoniah made the request from her. And Shlomo gets absolutely furious without explaining what went on. If you look in Pasuk Chaf Beis, we'll read the translation, 22. The king replied to his mother, "Why request Abishag the Shunamite for Adoniah? Request the kingship for him." And there's no difference between asking for Abishag as a wife and asking for the kingship. For he is my older brother, and the priest Abiatar and Yoav ben Tzuria are on his side. He's clearly trying to make an uprising. The question you have to ask is, what just happened here? He asked for, David's got a warmer. He says, "I'd like to marry her." And Shlomo erupts. He's so upset about something. He sees that there's some sort of ruse over here to take over the throne. What exactly does he see that he thinks that there's a rebellion over here?
And so the wife of a king can only go to another king.
That's true. That's very true.
Right.
I missed who's speaking.
Bernard. You know he was a.
Bernie.
It was Bernie? Bernie. So Bernie's got a great point. A wife of a king can only go to another king. But she's not a wife.
Never made a wife.
He's a
Right.
quasi-
She's a warmer. But Bernie's picking up on something crucial, which is actually what I want to pull out of the next source. We have one other place where something very similar happens. When Avshalom wants to take the throne, in Shmuel Bet, you might remember. So he asks Achitophel, "What should I do to demonstrate that I'm trying to take the throne?" And right, exactly. And Achitophel says to Avshalom, "Go and take David's concubines, sleep with them, and by that you demonstrate somehow, I don't understand exactly how this makes sense, but you somehow demonstrate that you are the king, that you have ownership in a sense." And so that's exactly what Avshalom does in a very despicable act. He goes and sleeps with David's concubines. So what we're seeing here is that taking a wife or someone who's assumed to be, someone intimate with the king is considered an act, congruent with trying to take over the kingship. So the question is exactly what we were saying a moment ago but wait a moment. Abishag wasn't a wife. She was just a professional warmer. So why is this so bad? So the answer is, and I guess we're kind of hinting to that, is that what we all know, Bnei Yisrael don't necessarily know. Because in the eyes of Bnei Yisrael, it probably looks like Abishag is David's concubine or wife, just like David's concubines with the case of Avshalom. So why should they think that? So if you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense, because the Navi emphasized this to us in multiple ways. Number one, it specified they were looking for a virgin. Like we said, why does a virgin matter? Virgin doesn't seem to make any sense unless we're talking about a wife. And also, why did they emphasize they were looking for a beautiful woman? She was very beautiful. What does that have to do with a warmer? And then the text tells us she's very beautiful, right? And only we know, we're told by the Psukim that David wasn't intimate with her. But if you think about it, everyone else knows David was just looking for the most beautiful girl in the land. He got it, so to speak. So everyone else thinks that Abishag was, in a sense, a wife of David. So that's really the opening to answering a lot of our questions. But there's actually even more than that. Because if you look through the text, and we'll get through the proofs in a moment, but Abishag's relationship to David isn't just a concubine. The Navi uses language and hints to the fact that Abishag is meant to reference the story with David and Bathsheba. So maybe you'll remember that David had Uriah killed, and because of the fact that he had impregnated his wife Bathsheba. And so Natan the prophet, comes to rebuke David. And if you look in source 7, we have the language over here. Here, L'arash ein kol. So Natan is giving a metaphor again for the act which David did. He gives the metaphor of a pauper with one sheep. L'arash ein kol kim kevsachat. There's a poor man with only one ketana, with one small sheep. Asher kana v'chaya, v'tigadel imo. He's got one sheep he loves. Banav yachdav mipito tochel, would eat from his bread. Mikisot tishteh. And here's a key line. Uvecheko tishkav utehi lo kivat. So it would sleep in his bosom, and it was like a daughter to him. So that phrase, uvecheko tishkav, that the sheep, which is a reference to Bathsheba, would sleep in his bosom, is not in any way a common phrase. But if you actually look back all the way back in source 1 and we'll go up. So we had that same language. In Pasuk Bet, again in the pink highlights just to make it easier, so his slave said, go find a beautiful woman and she should be in front of the king and she will warm him, and she shall again let her lie in your bosom. That same language. So why is that language so important? It could be that that's meant to parallel, to hint to us that there's some connection between Abishag and Bathsheba. More proofs to that is that there's only 3 times in all of Tanakh where Abishag, where Natan, Bathsheba, and David come up. The first is by the story of the scandalous story of David and Bathsheba. The second one's right here, where David, Bathsheba, and Natan all come for the insurrection with Adoniah. So there seems to be, again, some sort of parallelism. And just in case you don't think that that parallelism is convincing, the Navi actually shouts it at you, which is what we just had a moment ago, that just as Bathsheba entered into the king's chamber, oh, by the way, Abishag Shunamit was serving the king. So what's that getting at? Meaning, again, we said that seems to be totally random. The answer is it kind of is totally random. But the Navi's trying to pick up on something over here, or trying to help us pick up on something over here, that Abishag is somehow reminiscent of Bathsheba and the Bathsheba scandal. So the question we have to ask is, okay, so what's the point of the comparison? Why is this important? So I think we can answer all those questions based on one Radak and something I read in the name of Rabbi Menachem Leibtag, who's one of the greatest experts in Tanakh in Israel. So I'm going to go down to source 8. The Radak asks, so we said that David swore to Bathsheba that Shlomo, her son, would become king. So you remember, after they had their first son, while Uriah was still alive, which she became impregnated with, so then Uriah's killed and they have the son, and then that son ends up dying. So Radak explains, why did David make a promise to Bathsheba that Shlomo would be king? So Radak explains, for when the child died, Bathsheba said, it died because of our sin. Now, even if we will have a surviving child in the future, like Shlomo, his brothers will humiliate him because our union was originally through sin. Meaning, Bathsheba was always aware that Shlomo might be viewed as the product of a scandal. The whole world knew about what happened with David, with Uriah, with Bathsheba. They knew David's first son was killed because of it. So Shlomo as the next king would be a controversial choice. And Bathsheba's aware of that's going to be Shlomo's legacy. That's going to be her legacy with Shlomo. So what does got to do with Abishag? So Rabbi Menachem Leibtag has a very sharp point in the text, which we highlighted in yellow over here. If you look in Pasuk Tet, in the 9th Pasuk over here, so who did Adoniah call to go and celebrate with him? Vayikrat kol achav bnei hamelech, he called all the brother princes of the king, l'chol anshe Yehuda avdei hamelech, and all the king's servants of the tribe of Yehuda. Meaning the king's servants, the avdei hamelech, David's servants, are on Adoniah's side. So Rabbi Leibtag just points out something beautiful, that if you look in the very beginning, who were the people who suggested to David, hey, you know what would be a great idea? Go get this Na'ara Betula girl. So the people who suggest that were Abadav, were the servants of David. The same people who are on Adoniah's side are the ones who made the suggestion to David to go get Abishag a moment ago. So the search for Abishag, it seems, is actually part of Adoniah's campaign to become the next king. Now, why should that be? So Rabbi Leibtag gave one answer. I'm going to give a slightly different one. The answer is that David could have been heated up in a different way. You don't need a human being, nor do you need her to be the most beautiful human being in order to be heated up. You can light a fire. But for some reason, or we'll see, that Adoniah wanted to do this to discredit Shlomo. But remember, Shlomo's the only brother who Adoniah doesn't invite. He knows Shlomo's his competition. And he also knows that everyone remembers what scandalous relationship led to Shlomo's existence. So what Adoniah is trying to do is he's trying to make an apparent romance. That David's apparent romance with the newest beautiful woman in Israel is meant to remind everyone of the last time this happened. You remember the last time this happened? At face level, David stole another man's wife. He had him killed. and then he stayed married to that woman. And Shlomo here, the person who you might think is going to be the next king, he's the product of that relationship. So what Adoniah is trying to do is he's trying to discredit Shlomo. He's trying to consolidate his own power by just having everyone remember that Shlomo is the product of a scandalous relationship. But Natan jumps to the prophet jumps to the rescue. He alerts Bathsheba, who quickly alerts David, and the power is transferred to Shlomo before it's too late. And with that, I think we can also explain the language of Chata'im. We said that maybe that Bathsheba and Shlomo are worried that they're going to be sinners. So what do you mean sinners? So the Radak explains beautifully. He says, what do you mean that we'll be sinners? I'll just read the English here in source 9. If my son Shlomo will not become the king, it will reveal our sin in the affair of Uriah. Everyone's going to be thinking about that. People will say, it was because of my sin and my son that my son could not become the king. So it's beautiful because what Adoniah is trying to do is he's trying to emphasize the product, how Shlomo came to be, which is to recognize and to emphasize Bathsheba's sin. So that's why if Adoniah becomes the king, that will be the legacy of that Bathsheba and Shlomo will end up becoming nothing more than sinners. So I just want to summarize and then we'll open up for questions before we do part 2. We had 6 questions. 1, 2, and 3 were, why is it important that Abishag's a virgin? Why does she need to be so beautiful? And is this really the only way to attend to David's needs? And the answer is no, it's presumably not. You know, he could have had a fire, he could have had a normal looking man or woman, but Adoniah is trying to make it look as though David is giving in to his desires again by looking to take another's wife, reminiscent of Bathsheba, to indirectly defame Shlomo. The reason the Tanakh tells us that they weren't intimate, this is question 4, why does the Tanakh need to tell us that they weren't intimate, is because that's to emphasize that in everyone else's perspective, that's not obvious. Only we know that they weren't intimate, but to everyone else, it sure looks like they were. And then question 5, why is Bathsheba mentioned, why is Abishag mentioned just as Bathsheba comes in? Well, it's because it's trying to emphasize to us that we know that Abishag and Bathsheba, there's a parallelism which we're supposed to pick up on. And then finally, the language of Chata'im can now be better understood, since that's exactly what Adoniah's campaign was trying to push, that Shlomo and Abishag were the product of sin. So I'm going to pause for a second. I hope that was clear. And if anyone has any questions, I'd love to hear them. I'm reading now, there are clear rules of succession to be the next king or queen of England. So then what that person told me was incorrect. So do we know who the next king or queen is going to be, just out of curiosity?
If it follows traditional rules, it'll be King Charles,
They'll follow
her son.
And does it always follow traditional rules?
Well, he's a divorcee. That's the only question.
Uh-huh.
The thing is, when I read Chatayim, it's like, it means you lose it. And I'm reading along in Mikros Gedolos while you're doing this. Ralbag says he'll be put to death.
Okay, that's a very reasonable explanation.
It's all he lost the fight. He'll be killed.
Right. I think that's totally 100% reasonable. I mean, what's interesting is that when Adoniah revolts, Shlomo doesn't kill him. So you have to wonder if that's a reasonable response to kill someone just for claiming kingship when there doesn't seem to be such clear rules over here. But I think that's totally consistent. I happen to just like this explanation because it answers a lot more questions than just that one. Rabbis say shivim panim laTorah. So there's 70 different ways you can interpret the same text, and I'm hoping we got one. Someone asked me, I'm just looking at my chat, Avishag is a virgin. How does she remind the people of Bathsheba, who was a married woman? So I think that's a fantastic question. I think that just fundamentally what we're saying here is that David is a person who gave into his desires before, the most beautiful woman on a terrace, and he's giving into his desires over here now. In Tanakh, and also in the times of Mishnayot and Gemara, it's very clear that for some reason it was very important to people to have to marry virgins. That was like something which people cared about in what they married. So at the end of the day, virgin is something which reminds people of a woman who David plans on getting married to. Okay, I'm going to read this one last question, and we'll move on to the next one. I got a private question. I'll see. I think I can read it out loud. If King David needs to be warmed up, why wait so long to find a lovely lady? Doesn't that defeat the purpose? Couldn't there have been a different or better reason to bring Abishag in? I hear. I mean, I don't know. I'm not familiar of a better or different reason. If anyone has any better ideas, I'm happy to take them. I do not claim to have the only possible explanation here, but I'm hoping it's one of them. Okay, fantastic. So maybe let's get on to part number 2. We have 20 minutes, so we'll make sure that we don't go over time. Let me go back to the screen share. Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is, again, the most famous court case in Tanakh, for sure, in all of history, maybe. It starts with a whole introduction. We're going to skip the introduction just in terms of time, make sure that everyone can finish by 9. Maybe we'll end a few minutes early, but I don't want to take up anyone's time extra. I'll have as much time afterwards if you want to speak out possible other interpretations or whatever you're thinking. I'd love to hear. So what goes on in the beginning before we get to, we're in Perek Gimel right now. So Shlomo's solidified his rule. He just has in source 10, he has an encounter with God at night. God asks him, what do you want? I'll give you anything you want. Shlomo says, I just want to be able to judge the people. Give me wisdom so that I can judge the people. And God is very happy with that decision and promises to give him that and much, much more. Now, in Pasuk Tet Zayin, the moment after Pasuk Tet Vav, and actually the previous thing, all of a sudden Shlomo awoke, he wakes up, and it was a dream. He knows it's a dream, he gives offerings. And then we're told in source number 11 over here, Az, which literally means, could mean later, or it could mean all of a sudden, but the next story is to Az Tavon. I'm just going to read this first Pasuk in Hebrew, because again, there's a word which is important to read in Hebrew. Az tavon shtayim nashim. There were 2 women which came to Shlomo, zonot, who were, and I'll translate according to how almost everyone translates that word. Zonot is a prostitute, a harlot. So there's 2 women who are prostitutes or harlots. El hamelech v'ta'amodna lefanav, and they come to him. Now, again, one of the questions you have to ask is, why on earth is it important that these women are harlots? You couldn't have just told me that there were 2 women. Rashi and Unklos are bothered enough by this question that they say it must just mean innkeepers. It must just be a term for someone we'd expect to have children, maybe. But they try and not ignore, but maybe mitigate the language because it seems a little strange. So the first woman said, this is the most famous court case, please, my lord, and then I'm going to read it through. And the reason it's important to read it through is because we're going to get back to a lot of the language over here. But I'm going to read it in English right now. The first woman said, please, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. On the 3rd day after I was delivered, this woman also gave birth to a child. We were alone. There was no one else with us in the house, just the 2 of us in the house. During the night, this woman's child died because she lay on it. She smothered it. She arose in the night and took my son from my side while your maidservant was asleep and laid him in her bosom. And she laid her dead son in my bosom, meaning she switched the babies. When I arose in the morning to nurse my son, there he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, it was not the son I had born, meaning I noticed it was not the same child. So now in Pasuk Chaf Bet, I'm going to go read it in Hebrew. But Tomer Ha'isha Acheret, the other woman who was just accused, responds, Lochi, it's not true. B'ni hachai v'nei chamet. My child is the living one and yours is the dead one. V'zot omeret Lochi b'nei chamet u'v'ni hachai. Your son's the dead one and mine is the live one. V'tidaberna lifnei hamelch, and they continued on arguing in front of the king. Vayomer hamelech, so the king, Shlomo, goes along and he says, Zot omeret ze b'nei hachai u'v'nei chamet, v'zot omeret Lochi b'nei chamet u'v'nei hachai. So for some reason, not entirely clear, Shlomo feels the need to go and repeat everyone's claims back to them. This one says, mine's the live one, yours the dead one. And that one says, yours is the dead one and mine is the live one. So then, we don't need to read the rest inside, but Shlomo makes his famous court ruling. He says, fetch me a sword. They fetch him a sword. He says, cut the baby in 2. And the one who obviously is the mother says, no, do not cut the baby in 2. That baby, give it to the other woman. The other woman screams out, please, mother, she could give her the live child, only don't kill him. The other one insisted, Gamli gamlach lo yeh gizoru. For both mine, meaning neither mine nor hers shall it be, kill it. Obviously, that's the one who's not the mother. And then the king famously says, this one's the real mother, that one's not the real mother. And everyone heard this decision and they were in awe. They were afraid of the king because of his great wisdom. So I used to think growing up, and this was, I guess, my own lack of knowledge or my own lack of psychological insight, but I used to think that the greatness of Shlomo was he was able to figure out after one woman said, kill it, and the other woman said, give it to the other woman, Shlomo figured out, oh, this one's the real mother and that one's not the real mother. Obviously, that's not the case. I think anyone who understands, people a little bit could figure out that this one was the real mother and that one was the fake mother. No real mother's going to say, please kill, my own child. So Shlomo's wisdom was clearly in the way he devised the test. So we have to ask a few questions on this story. The first one we've already asked. Number one, why is it important that these women are called prostitutes? Meaning Rashi and Targum, we already said, call them innkeepers, but the most likely translation given by most Rishonim is a harlot. That doesn't seem to be so relevant. What's the importance? Second question we have to ask, what motivated the lying woman to try and steal a child that wasn't hers? So nowadays people kidnap people for all sorts of heinous reasons. There's ransom and there's slavery and all sorts of absolutely terrible things. But in this case, there aren't so many possibilities. Was she just trying to fulfill a psychological desire to be a mother? Was she embarrassed? What was the reason behind why she did this? So question 3. Why does Shlomo repeat each of the women's claims? They both said it. The king goes ahead and he goes and says back exactly what they said. So Chazal, our rabbis, learn from here that a dayan, when someone is a judge, so they actually should repeat the claims back to the people who have said it, just to make sure he's got everything clear and he can hear it he can say it in his own perspective. But just Pashut Pshat, the basic simple explanation, it's a little unclear why Shlomo felt the need to go and say everything over, unless maybe there's something more to that, which we'll get back to. And then finally, how did Shlomo know, and I think that this is really the biggest question, how did Shlomo know that the lying woman would react the way she did? Meaning Shlomo calls, okay, get a sword. So when you say get a sword and cut up the baby, and you have one woman who's lying and one woman who's telling the truth. So I understand that the woman who's telling the truth obviously is going to say, don't kill the baby. But if you have a lying woman who wants to keep a baby for herself, is she really going to be so cruel? She's not going to have the smallest amount of compassion to say, okay, actually you can give the baby back to the other one. Maybe I was intending to kidnap a baby. That's pretty bad, obviously. But I'm not trying to kill a baby. Like that's like another level. How does Shlomo know that what you'd think would be a very reasonable response, that she'd also say, please give up the baby, I don't want it to die? How does Shlomo know that? And the answer to that question is probably where Shlomo's great wisdom comes from. And we'll get back to exactly what that is. That question of how did Shlomo know that this would be her response bothered the Radvaz, one of the early Achronim, I don't know exactly when he lived, maybe the 15 or 1600s. He was so troubled by this, he said there must be so much more in the text which we're just not given. Maybe one of the babies looked like the mother. He's got like a whole long piece about how Shlomo might have known what happened and how clearly we're missing something, and Shlomo must have known from the outset. But I'd like, hopefully, to propose something which, not my own idea, but other Rishonim's ideas for how Shlomo knew that the woman would react the way she did. Okay, so those are our 4 questions. So let's start with question 2. Question 2 is the easiest because one of the psukim basically answers it for us. What motivated the lying woman to try and steal a child that wasn't hers? So if you look in source 12, I'm not going to read it inside, but the answer is almost obvious once you think about the pasuk. One of the woman who's lying ends up saying, cut up the baby. So if a woman just has a motherly desire to be a mother, or if she's a little bit embarrassed, so she doesn't say, go and kill the baby. She says, oops, I did something wrong, maybe I'm mistaken. But going from kidnapping to murder is not something which makes any sense for a woman who's just trying to fulfill a basic need. This doesn't fulfill the need, so why would she lead to something's death? So David says the obvious answer is that this woman was jealous of the other woman. Whoever the liar is saying that we should cut up the baby because that will make her happy in a sense. Meaning, whoever the real mother is, the reason that the baby was stolen was because the one the one who doesn't have a living baby now doesn't want the other woman to be happy while she doesn't have a baby. So if you cut up this very baby, which is the source of all of her jealousy, which is the source of the bereaved mother's jealousy, so that fulfills her wish just as well. That's why she says, go and cut up the baby. So because she says, go cut up the baby, that's how you figure out what was really motivating her. What was motivating her was jealousy. Okay, fine. So she was motivated by jealousy. I think that much is pretty, I think everyone, just about everyone in the Rishonim agrees to that fact. But still the question becomes, we know after she says, go and cut up the baby, that that was her intention all along, that she was just jealous. That was her reasoning. And that's why it's a reasonable thing for her to say that she's going to cut up the baby, maybe. But still, how does Shlomo know that? How does Shlomo know, right? Shlomo, when he devises the test, has not yet figured out, we think, there's no way to know that this woman's jealous. So she's just got, let's say, a motherly desire. She's just doing it out of embarrassment. So how does Shlomo know that she's jealous? How does Shlomo know that she's going to go and kill the baby? So let's do it this way. So it's worth mentioning, I think, before we get to the real answer, just maybe one note which makes it a little bit easier to understand. But the blind woman's moral compass is clearly a little out of tune, or very out of tune, which I think is what we just have to recognize. And I think that the Navi is trying to emphasize to that. It's takes a pretty diabolical person to kidnap another woman's baby and then to lie to her face about it. And it's possible that that's why the text is emphasizing that the liar was a harlot, to emphasize that she might not have been the flagship of decency. But obviously promiscuity and even kidnapping isn't the same as murder, so even if she's not, the greatest of moral figures, that's not enough for Shlomo to know that she's going to say, go and kill the baby. Again, Shlomo has to know that she's jealous in order for this to even be reasonable. So how does Shlomo know that she'd allow an innocent baby to be murdered rather than admit the truth? So the following insight is all based on the Malbim. The Malbim is one of the later Rishonim. Actually, excuse me, he's one of the earlier Achronim. Again, I don't know the exact years. I should have looked it up. I think he's in maybe he might even be the later Achronim. He lives, I think, around the 1800s. Someone will tell me who knows Jewish history better than I do. But he was one of the greatest experts in Tanakh, and he has an absolutely beautiful insight. So I want to go back to the psukim we highlighted over here, Chaf Bet and Chaf Gimel. If you look at the language is not identical between the two women, right? There's the accuser. The accuser gives this whole long story, and then in pasuk Chaf Bet, but Tomer ha'isha ha'acheret, the other woman, the accused, responds, Lo ki b'ni hachai, my child is the live one, u'b'nei chamet, and yours is the dead one. V'zot omer, and the accuser says, Lo chi b'nei chamet, u'b'nei hachai. She reverses it. The first one said, my son's alive and yours is dead. And the second one says, your son's dead and mine's alive. She doesn't respond exactly the same way as the first one said. She puts first, the accuser puts first, b'nei chamet, that your child is, the dead boy is yours, and mine is the live one. And in fact, when you look at Shlomo, the way he says it over exactly the way that they said it. That Zeb b'ni, this one says, my child is the live one and yours is dead. And the other one says, yours is the dead child and mine is the live child. So why is that important? So what the Malbim says is that human psychology, and this is what Shlomo picked up on, is that you put first in what you're saying, or you emphasize in what you're saying, that which is most important to you. So if both parents really just wanted the child to be their own, they both would have said, Zeh b'ni achai v'nei chamet, but that's not what happened. The accused says, my child's the live one and yours is the dead one. But the accuser says, no, the dead boy is yours, mine is the live one. She first says that your child is dead. So why does that make sense? So the Malbim says, even if you're not convinced about that, so he says, if you look at the end of the pasuk, vatidaberna lifnei hamelach, that they spoke in front of the, literally means they continued speaking before the king. What the Malbim says is that they continued saying this exact same thing over and over again. I mean, the same line of mine's alive, yours is dead, no, yours is dead, mine's alive, is what they kept on saying over again. And that's why Shlomo goes on and emphasizes that exact language. So if you think about it, the first, what the Malbim says, that the first one who says, no, the live one is my son, she's clearly telling the truth. All she cares about is, this is my child, I want my child. She doesn't really care about what the other woman's, whether the other woman's child is dead or alive. But the accuser, who then responds, she is more interested in the fact that the other woman's is considered the dead one than that this is considered the live one. So if this woman, the accuser who's reversing the order, again in the light blue, if she really just has a motherly instinct, she wants the baby to be hers, she's going to say mine is the live one. She's going to emphasize the fact that the living child is hers because she wants it for herself. But the other possibility, which again is jealousy, which we know in the end, but at this point Shlomo doesn't yet know, or Shlomo's about to figure out, the fact that she's doing it out of jealousy, Shlomo picks up on that because she keeps on emphasizing the dead child is yours. Because when someone's jealous, so there's two ways to make a jealous person happy. If I want something else which someone else has, I'm just as happy for myself to get it as I am if the other person is going to lose it. So for her, she's just as happy saying the dead boy is the other person's, meaning as long as the other woman's child is dead, I'm happy. That fulfills my goal. So the Malbim says, at that point, Shlomo picked up on the fact that she was the liar. The accuser was the one who was not telling the truth. And we just have a few extra minutes. Maybe if you just look at, source 13, there's a song we sing on Shabbat that Re'ei Ligveret, this is called Tzama Nafshi, written by the Ibn Ezra. So it says, Re'ei Ligveret Emet, that look upon the genuine women, referencing Bnei Yisrael, referencing the Jews, Shivcha no Emet, as the slave woman, referencing the other nations, or maybe probably specifically the Christians, says to her, Lo ki v'nei chametu b'ni achai. So Ibn Ezra takes the same language of the lying woman in our story. No, for your son is the dead one and mine is the living one, meaning the other nations tell the Jews that you guys are done with and we're the real living, we're the real continuers of God's, we're God's new nation. But it could be that Ibn Ezra is intentionally choosing the language of Lo ki v'nei chametu b'ni achai, besides for the fact that it fits in with the way the poem works, but that he intentionally chooses the woman who's lying because he wants to say that they're saying something which isn't true. So I thought that was just an interesting point. But this is the key over here. What the Malbim says is the key to everything. So the woman is speaking the whole time. She's the one who's lying. She's emphasizing the fact that this baby, the other woman's baby is dead, and that's what's more important to her than the fact that her own baby is, in theory, alive. It also, by the way, might explain, the one who's making the claim says there was no one else in the house besides for us, and I slept through the night and I woke up in the morning and this wasn't my child. Yet she also says that I know that the other woman smothered her baby and switched him out. So, meaning that she lied on her and that's how the baby died. So the Rishonim are a little bit bothered. How did she know that the other woman's child died? There was no one else in the room and you claimed that you slept the whole time. So they say maybe they're just, I don't know, maybe the baby was disfigured or maybe she's making up a story, just what she thinks is most likely. But it happens to be that now it's easy, she happens to be caught in a line a little bit, meaning it's consistent that she's making up a story over here. So it could be she's saying something which isn't so sensible necessarily. So what's important for us though is that at that point Shlomo knows who the rightful owner is. So he could have judged right there and then. He could have said, this one's telling the truth and that one's telling a lie. But everyone else who doesn't see what Shlomo sees would have thought that's crazy. You don't make a decision without any seeming evidence. So Shlomo devises this whole brilliant theatrical plan to demonstrate who the real mother is. And obviously, the real mother won't have her child die, and he knows the faker isn't going to have compassion. Why not? Because killing the other woman's baby would make her thrilled. It accomplishes exactly what she wants in kidnapping the baby by taking it away from the other woman with less work. Now I don't need to raise a baby myself. You put that in combination with the fact that this woman is clearly quite twisted, and it leads Shlomo to devise this brilliant test. So before we open up for questions or comments or anything that's on people's minds, I just wanted to finish with maybe one quick idea before Elul. There's determining factors over here if you want to read that over as a reminder, but there's just one lesson for Elul, that right now what's motivating this woman, we said, was a very acute sense of kina, of jealousy, and what's sometimes difficult to understand is that Chazal, our sages, actually praise something, a certain type of kina. They praise a certain type of jealousy, what they call kinat sofrim, or jealousy of scholars. So I took a Rabbeinu Yonah over here, just one text, which makes this point, but there's many, many in our literature that talks about a good type of jealousy. He says that jealousy of scholars or kinat sofrim increases wisdom because you see that your friends are holier and wise, so you're going to desire to be like them, and then because you're jealous of their wisdom, your wisdom will increase and your good deeds will increase, and it'll put you on the straight path. And anyone who's ever felt jealousy before, it's hard to understand. How am I supposed to take this terrible trait of jealousy and use it for something good? How do I know when this is a good type of jealousy or a bad type of jealousy? The person next to me is more wealthy, so they're able to give more tzedakah, and they do more chesed, or they are more learned, they're more respected, they're more diligent or more observant than I am. So how do you know when one's admiration or jealousy is the good type that our sages praise, or when it's something negative that needs to be worked on, that you need to fix that character trait of yourself or to think about things? So I saw in the name of Rav Moshe Kestenbaum, who has a fantastic book on midos and fixing midos. He says the way to tell whether this is a good type of jealousy or a bad type of jealousy is if you ask yourself, that person has X and I don't have it. Would I be happy only if I got X as well? Or would I be just as happy if they lost X? This woman, the liar, is just as happy if X is taken away. If you're just as happy with the other person losing that which you desire, so that's not the good type of jealousy we're talking about. We're not talking about jealousy like that. We're talking about admiration. Admiration means I only want to grow myself. I don't want the other person to lose anything. So with that, if anyone has questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. I'm here able to stay for as long as anyone wants.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rabbi, do you see any comparisons with Avishag and with what happened with Reuven and Bilhah?
That's actually fascinating. It's very, actually, yes. So I saw it once, I think it was the Chidushei Harim made that point. So it's a fantastic, fantastic point. And if you look through our history of the kingship, it's absolutely flabbergasting that so many of the relationships which led to the kingship, to basically David and the past that, were relationships which seem very strange. So you have, let's say, Yehuda way back when and Tamar. So there seems to be, he seems to have a child with someone who appears to be a prostitute. And Ruth HaMoaviah is someone who is a Moaviah, who we're not even sure, is she allowed into the congregation or is she not allowed into the congregation? And then that woman we end up saying that it's okay, but it was like a whole tumult at the time. You have the same thing with Bathsheba and David. And then this Avishag thing seems to be in the same category of strange, funny relationships. And I don't know what's going on over there. I remember Chidushei Harim had an explanation, but I don't remember what it was. But that there was something, I think it might have related to the fact that no matter how bad a person is, there's always the ability to do tshuva, and even someone who has such a tough past can, if they do tshuva, if they do repentance, so then they can come and even become the king of Israel. But people have made that point. I've seen that before. So
Okay, thank you. It's a good message for now, Tishrei.
Yeah, for sure. I'd be an even better message than the one I gave. Should have given the shir.
When Rashi says at the end, after as Shlomo's giving his decision, and he says, "This is the mother," and Rashi says a bus call came out and announced it. Is that supposed to be an affirmation of what Shlomo said, or just another highlight of how brilliant Shlomo was, that the bus call was agreeing with?
Right. So what I think that Rashi's getting at is that there was something divine about Shlomo's decision. Now, it's hard for me to understand. The part where Shlomo says, "This is the mother," I really have trouble understanding why that takes divine intelligence. I feel like people with basic human psychology could have made that call once you make the sword test. But the part before, where he devises this plan and he sees through in the very, very minutiae of their words. So I think what that's emphasizing is that there was a baskel, so to speak, that either God's wisdom showed it, which is one option, or the other option is it was as if a baskel came out that this was so obviously true, it's like a call out from heaven that this is the mother, maybe that would emphasize it. But that's an interesting Rashi.
He was so bright that he looked at all the body language and everything else that went into it. So he was really observing and listening, and he put it together in his own kind of wisdom,
Right.
But Yeshikoah, thank you. It was beautiful.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Yeshikoah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
So, Rob, I just have a quick question. The contrast between the beginning of Parak Gimel and the end is striking to me, where it starts out where he's marrying the Bat Paro, Bat Paro, and then we're ending with this court case of all court cases where he's, at such a great level. So it appears that there's both ends of the spectrum in the same parak here, which is a little bit striking to me. I was also going to ask, how do you think his father would have handled that court case? Would it have been any different? But when I look back to the beginning of the parak, I see we start off with something which isn't really viewed as a positive, and then we end with something that he's, glorified in his ability to navigate this case between these two women. So it's just an interesting contrast within the same parak.
100%. Can I call you Howard? I just see your name over here, but
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So great question, Howard. I'm struggling. I really wanted to talk about that. I did not have an answer. It's not only that. It's not only the beginning of the parak and the end of the parak, but if you look at, I think, like the third pasuk already, first we're told he marries an Egyptian woman. Then 2 psukim later, we're told, and Shlomo loved God like crazy, basically, is what it says. I don't remember the exact language, but it's like, what is going on over here? So our sages say that she converted, which sounds nice. It does like something maybe, but other midrashim clearly, really give it to Shlomo. And we'll see in a bunch of prakim later, Shlomo's going to end up sinning because of women like this. And the Abarbanel actually deals with a question which is very hard to wrap our heads around. There's actually an explicit prohibition in the Torah. Even if an Egyptian woman converts, you're not allowed to marry her for 3 generations. So it seems that even if you convert her, there's no way getting around it. There's an explicit pasuk which says you cannot marry an Egyptian woman. And in the very next pasuk it says, and Shlomo loved God with like all of his heart. So like, what's going on? And I have no clue. I saw the Abarbanel really struggled with it. He was saying maybe he learned the pasuk differently, even though the pasuk seems pretty explicit. I didn't have a good explanation. I was actually going to leave that open for questions in another version of the shir I thought of giving. So if you find anything, please let me know.
Okay, even without an answer, I just think it's fascinating to see the contrast within the same parak. So much of the Navi that we read is a historical, this happened, that happened, but here you have just a stark contrast in events within the same chapter. So I thought that was interesting.
One of the starkest contrasts you can have for sure.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rabbi, I think we're overthinking Shlomo's activity. I think Shlomo was a good psychologist. I don't know that he ever intended to cut anybody, but he knew that he had to get a reaction to prove what he really believed. And the only way to get it, and this was a perfect way to get a reaction. If this didn't work, he would have had to try something else. I don't think he had any intention of cutting, and it really worked. I mean, once he made that statement, people reacted the way he expected that they would.
Right. I would agree with, what can I call you?
Ira.
Ira, perfect. So I would agree with you 100%, Ira, that he never had an intention of cutting the baby. The question is, what's so smart about it? Meaning all you're doing is you're eliciting.
Psychology wasn't born, he was ahead of the game. Psychology wasn't born yet. Do you know my cousin, Rabbi Wasserman?
In
Denver, right?
Yeah. Oh,
Rosh Hashiva of
yeah. Oh, what a pleasure.
Yeah, he's my oldest first cousin.
That's so cool.
We both named Yitzchak.
Right. So that's very cool. So your question, right. So what the Midrashim point out, the Midrashim say, what was plan B? Let's say both women were to say, okay, give it to the other woman. So then what's Shlomo going to do? So the answer to that must be Shlomo had an inkling that this woman would have reacted the way she did, which is why I was trying to say, what I said. Otherwise, this is just going to make Shlomo look foolish. This is supposed to demonstrate his great wisdom. So that's why the Rishonim want to say, that's why the Mom wants to say he already knew beforehand that this would be her reaction. And the brilliance was just to demonstrate what he already knew.
We look forward to meeting you
Look forward to meeting you also.
someday.
Yeah, Zoom, as I said, does not do it.
No, definitely not.
See, every time someone speaks, I then go through all the faces to try and figure out who it was so I can see them.
Thank you, Yeshikoach. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your time, Rabbi.
Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, well done. Welcome aboard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Rabinovich. I'm going to stop the recording here, and I wish you a good evening.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Dukler.
It's very kind of you, Ellie.
Of course, of course. I don't want the kid to stay up all
Right.
night on the Zoom.
Letting you sleep.
Go home, have fun.
Yeah, have a good night.
Right.